Hello everyone, thanks for coming. My name is Jeff Turner. I'm the Deputy Communications Director for Governor Dunleavy, and again, thank you all for coming. We're here today to unveil the FY21 fiscal summary. I want to take a minute just to kind of review how the press conference is going to unfold and be conducted. In a couple minutes, the governor's going to come in, followed by his cabinet members. And then the governor is going to talk for approximately 5 to 7 minutes, give a brief speech about what he's proposing. And then afterwards, he's short on time, so he's going to take a few questions from the reporters here in the room, and then he's going to need to leave. After that, we'll have the commissioners here, plus OMB staff that'll be happy to answer any more detailed questions about the fiscal summary. So. Anyway, all the OMB documents are now live. They should be on there, and Lauren's passing out documents for you guys right now. Again, more detailed questions about the summary, please hold those for the commissioners, and let's just give the governor some high-level questions, and we'll go from there. And let's go ahead and get started.
Thanks, Jeff. Hey, good afternoon, everybody. So I'm going to open up our budget rollout. Today is the 11th. It's due on the 15th. We want to get it done a couple days early because the 15th is Sunday. So a lot of work went into the budget. Last year at this time, we had a new administration. We had folks coming on board. We were scrutinizing the budget. And as we all know, we rolled out a budget with pretty large reductions, about $1.6 billion. And that represented what the gap was between revenues and expenditures. Obviously, that began a very robust, vigorous conversation throughout the state of Alaska that continues today. That rollout last year, in some respects, really should have not been a surprise to most Alaskans that have been following this for some time, because we have run a budget deficit in terms of the gap where we've had to use savings over the last several years. So a lot of folks have been having this discussion as to what we're going to do with the budget. Last year we rolled out the budget with the $1.6 billion in reductions. We had a conversation with the legislature. The legislature themselves saw the need for reductions. They agreed to several $100 million in reductions. We vetoed further. We reduced further because we believe that the gap was just way too large. This summer, this fall, we've had time to work with our commissioners, work with the people in the various departments, talk with folks across Alaska, talk with groups that are recipients of our spending and our services and our programs. And so we put together a budget this year that reflects those discussions. We plan on discussing this further with Alaskans. I plan on going out and having meetings with Alaskans in as many communities as possible starting in January to hear what their feedback is in terms of what do they want Alaska to look like going forward. What kind of programs do they want? What kind of services do they want? And how are we going to go about paying for those services? We do this with a backdrop on our private economy. As we know, the private economy is doing better than it has done in the last couple of years. We are out of recession according to many economists. Our unemployment rates are at record lows. Our GDP is up 2 quarters in a row. Last quarter was 4.1%, a pretty steep jump for us, which is all good news. The private sector job development is up. Investment on the North Slope is up. Investment going into the international airport is up. So a lot of good economic news, but we still have a budget to deal with. As we go through the budget, there's a couple themes that I just want to talk to you about that underpin this budget. So enforcing fiscal discipline, you're not going to see an increase in the overall budget this year from our perspective. So we're going to roll out a budget that does not have increases in terms of total budget. We're going to honor the law, and what we mean by that is, for example, the permanent fund dividend still has its calculation and statute, and there's a lot of formula programs that are governed by statute. And so we're going to have to talk about those formula programs and other cost drivers that are embedded annually in the budgets. We're going to make sure that we roll out a budget that's truthful in terms of budgeting. In other words, the numbers and the fund sources and the amounts match so that we're all on the same page. And we're going to keep our commitments to Alaskans. Again, follow the law when it comes to the PFD, our public safety initiatives, and making sure that we keep Alaskans safe. So This was a budget that's not developed by one person. We had time, again, like we said, to develop this budget with a number of folks standing behind me, which will be answering some questions here in just a moment, Alaskans and other stakeholders across the state of Alaska. So we listened to a lot of Alaskans. We had a lot of discussions internally. And this is a springboard again. This is a budget that comes out. It's a springboard for discussions with the legislature, with the people of Alaska, because we have to work together to form a budget that's going to make sense for all of Alaskans. And that's what our goal is. The budget this year absorbs about $160 million in increases from formula-driven programs. So we absorb that internally through efficiencies, and we offset those costs by reductions in other areas. Our formula-driven programs account for over half of the operating budget. So over half of the operating budget is really not in my control to change. If we're going to change any of those formulas, it has to be done with partnership with the legislature. And so our people, our commissioners, are still looking at ways to reduce duplication, reduce duplicative services, cut travel, and any other way they can find to operate more efficiently. So we continue on that course. We're optimistic that throughout this year, going into next year, that we can still reduce the budget through these processes by millions of dollars, and we'll be happy to share that with the public and the press when we start going through that process. So some of the high points or highlights of the budget. Capital budget was designed to maximize federal funds. It's a total of $1.3 billion. The state portion is $143 million in UGF, and that represents about an 8% reduction from the previous year. CBR, the budget's going to rely on the CBR this year. About a $1.5 billion draw from the CBR leaves a balance of about $540 million. The PFD, this part of the budget complies with both laws, SB 26 and the decades-old calculations. Operating budget amount is about $4.39 billion in general fund spending. And the long-term fiscal outlook is really going to be predicated upon the discussion around the formula programs, also around some constitutional amendments, the spending and savings rule, for example, to hem us in once we come into some additional revenues, we hope, through the investment on the North Slope. We believe that we should engage the people of Alaska. As I mentioned last year, that the people of Alaska should be part of forming this budget and our sustainable fiscal plan with us, with the legislature, with the governor, the people of Alaska. And so I'm asking the legislature to give due consideration to these constitutional amendments that we introduced last year, because I believe if they are sent to the people of Alaska, that the people of Alaska will vote on those in the positive, because history has shown that when the people of Alaska get involved in the budgeting process to give us sideboards, they take advantage of that. And I think it's the people of Alaska that will lead us out of deficit spending and into a balanced budget for the future. So with that, I'll take a few questions. I do have some other meetings I have to attend to, but the folks behind me will fill in any details that you may have.
Let me go ahead and call on you guys individually. Please state your name and affiliation and ask your question. James, go ahead.
James Brooks from the Anchorage Daily News. Governor, you had mentioned the importance of following the law on this, and so I wanted to ask you then about the supplemental dividend that you've requested, because paying that supplemental dividend would require violating the legal limit on transfers from the permanent fund in the current fiscal year. Why is it important to pay that dividend, and how do you balance those two conflicting laws?
Right, and that's a very good question, because the calculations for that for the dividend have been on the books for almost 40 years. Those statutes have been around for a long time. The permanent fund dividend impacts more people than probably any other program or service that the state of Alaska delivers. Approximately 660,000 people are impacted by that program. And so there's no doubt we have to continue a discussion on the future of the PFD, but right now you've got a set of laws that calls for a calculation at a certain amount, and we're going to follow those laws.
Okay. Second question, Shauna.
Shauna Crandall, Alaska Education Update. Can you talk about your education budget? Are there any cuts, and what's your vision
There's no cuts in education.
No, okay.
No cuts in education. We'll be rolling out some initiatives in the near future on reading, tribal compacting, algebra, et cetera, but there's no cuts right now.
Okay, so you have policy things that you're going to be focusing on?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. Greg, Andrew, did either one of you have a question? Greg?
Greg Knight, KINY News of the North. Governor, with a full PFD, under current revenue and expense projections, would it not increase the deficit to almost $900 million? And should an income tax be on the table?
I think I'm sure there will be folks that will have discussions in the legislature about revenues this year. But in terms of the dividend, for almost 40 years, it was a transfer from the permanent fund, the ERA of the permanent fund, to the people of Alaska. It was only the last couple of years that folks started to look at it as an appropriation, as part of the overall budget package. But prior to that, it wasn't. And so until those statutes are changed, modified in some form or fashion, we continue to view the PFD as a transfer to the people of Alaska, and we will continue to follow those calculations.
Peter, did you have a question back there?
I did. Peter Siegel, Juneau Empire. You said that you want to have a conversation with Alaskans, but you've also said in this press conference that you've been talking to Alaskans, and there was a lot of action over the summer responding to your previous budget. What more do you want to understand from the people of Alaska?
Good question. So I want to go out and present all the numbers to the people, because they'll see that our savings is diminishing, that we're going to have to make some decisions, hard decisions, tough decisions. We began that last year. Are we going to reduce services, or do the people of Alaska want to ponder revenues? There's one way or the other that you have to pay for this, or a combination of both. We no longer can rely on savings. We're drawing down on our savings, and we know that. Our approach last year was to reduce the size of government. Our approach this year is to absorb the $160 million that would have been growth within the budget through efficiencies. We'll continue to look at efficiencies and keep the government as tight and as small as we possibly can. But unless there's going to be changes in formula programs, changes in laws about statutes that are on the books that drive some of these programs, we are not going to be able to keep this budget, shrink the size of this budget unless the people of Alaska want those formula programs changed. So we want to talk to them about the formula programs, what we have left in savings, and hear their feedback. We want to get their feedback on this. But folks behind me will be able to answer detailed questions and dive into the budget more, and we'll continue to have these discussions. But I'm going to run right now, but I do appreciate this. We'll have information up on the website, and OMB will be able to talk to you more about some detail on the questions. Any questions there? Okay? Thanks, folks, very much.
Okay. All right, let's go ahead and transition to the second part of the news conference. I'm sorry, Andrew, I'll give you the first crack here. We have commissioners and OMB staff that can answer more detailed questions about the fiscal summary. Something we can...
The governor last year had proposed paying back the amount that had been cut from dividends in 2016, 2017, and 2018. And I wanted to find out if the governor still supports that, and if so, where the money would come from, and if that's built into this budget.
So that legislation is still in the legislative process. There's been no movement on it. There's been no request for the back pay. The governor has submitted the 2019 supplemental payment, and that's where that stands.
Okay. Let's take one more question here in the room, and then we'll go online. Anyone? Peter?
So the governor said one of the efficiencies that they're looking for is reducing travel. Does that mean moving more state positions to Anchorage from Juneau?
Thanks for the question, Peter. So we're looking at different ways that we can increase efficiency and effectiveness across the government. In all of our departments, we're going to reduce redundancies, spending, travel, and waste. We'll look for increasing efficiencies and effectiveness, and all together looking for how we can achieve results. That's the end focus. So all of the departments are managing to mission, and mission will mean putting positions where they'll best achieve mission. So to your specific questions, we are not looking to reduce travel by putting positions in Anchorage. We're looking to reduce travel just to meet mission. So reducing travel will end up in producing results. Reducing travel is not just going to be to move positions to Anchorage. We'll be moving positions to Anchorage if it helps to achieve mission and helps to achieve results. That's the end game. We're not focusing on input of money. We're focusing on output of results across the board.
Okay, let's go ahead and take some questions online on the teleconference. Again, please state your name and affiliation, and if operator, you could patch through the first question, please.
Certainly. Anybody on the phone lines to register a phone question, please press the 1-4. And our first question is from the line of Becky Borer. Please go ahead.
Thank you. I'm not sure who is best situated to answer this question. Becky Borer with the Associated Press. The governor talked about cost drivers and formula-driven programs. Can you provide specifics on what would be examples of the formula programs or cost drivers that he would like the legislature to weigh, to analyze? And is the administration planning at any point to propose on its own any specific changes to these formula programs, or leave that in the court of the legislature?
Brian Fector, Office of Management and Budget. Some of the examples of formula programs would be like Medicaid, where eligibility levels are listed in statute, or perhaps K-12, where the funding formula is based on student counts. At this time, we're not planning on putting forward any legislation from the governor's office, but we'll be engaging with the legislature this session, I'm sure.
Okay, do we have another question online, please?
Yes. Our next question is from the line of Nat Hurst. Please go ahead.
Yeah, hi. Not sure who's best suited to answer this question, but I'll leave this to you guys. I mean, I guess I'm struck in just briefly perusing the fiscal summary by the fact that, in contrast to last year, we're not really seeing any major, or at least not many major proposals to make major cuts to government programs. And I mean, I guess I'm wondering if someone can speak to the administration's perspective on whether this is a acknowledgement that, Alaskans delivered a message that they don't want government to be any smaller than it is, or is that a misinterpretation of what this budget says?
Okay. Nat, we'll have Brett Huber, the governor's senior policy advisor, take that.
Nat, thanks for the question. I don't think it's an indication that there's been a change in course by this governor. I think it's an indication that a lot of work was done last year with the legislature and through the governor's office and by the administration. I think it's also an indication that the governor believes that Alaskans are going to do a great job in helping provide advice on how they want this state to look, what services we want to provide, and how we're going to pay for them.
Okay. And let's stick with the teleconference line. Do we have another question?
We have a question from the line of Erin McGroarty. Please go ahead.
Hi, Erin McBurdy with the Fairbanks Daily News Miner. Just in the key items of interest in the press release, I'm noting an increase in general fund spending for the Pioneer homes by about 18.3%. Does this mean that the previous rate increases for the residents there is going to be going away, or are those going to stick around?
Thank you. Excuse me. Thank you for that question. What that means is that as we implemented the rate increases last year and we dove into deep financial analysis of our residents, that we are still going to have these rate increases in place, but now we're getting a realistic picture of those who are living in the homes. It should be worth noting that we have as robust a waiting list as ever for individuals to get into the Pioneer homes.
Okay. Let's go back to the room for another question or two. Andrew, go ahead.
With the draw on the CBR, if that were to happen in this budget, then there would be more taken from the CBR. More than half the money would be taken from the CBR. It sounds like 3/4, roughly. Does the governor want to see changes this year that would prevent, does he feel that it's imperative or that it's essential that there are changes this year that would prevent a similar imbalance next year?
So it's a proposed budget. as mandated by the Constitution, that the governor's put a balanced proposed budget, and this budget uses the CBR. It's the beginning of a long and robust process with the legislature and the general public as we go through the next time frame through either April 15th or May 15th. So his budget proposes use of the CBR. It's been used before as a stopgap mechanism, and we know we have the revenue there, or we have the funds there, and so we'll look forward to working with the public and the legislature to make sure that the budget is met in a timely manner at the end of the session.
Greg?
Yeah, Greg Knight, KINY. Specifically for Department of Corrections, what are the increases going to address? Or the spending going to address?
Thank you, Greg, for that question. We have a $24 million increase, and that is specifically for population management, reducing recidivism, and our ongoing recruitment efforts.
James Brooks?
Yeah, for either Ben Stevens or Brian, you had mentioned that you're not planning on putting forward any legislation from the governor's office. Does that include any changes to oil and gas taxes?
No, as we stated, thank you, James. As we stated, there is no proposed legislation coming forth from the administration. We're going to work with the legislature to look at what the problem, how to address that revenue mechanism, but the answer to your question is not at this time.
Okay. We have one more question from the room, and then we'll go back online. Looks like no takers. Operator, let's go back online and take another question or two.
Our next question is from Sean McGuire. Please go ahead.
I don't know who this question would be directed to, but I'm looking through the department summaries, and there's spending here for special appropriations that last year was $863 million. It's now shrunken down to $70 million. I was wondering if someone could explain what that cut would entail.
Sean, could you repeat that question again, please?
So looking at the department summaries, there's spending in the 2020 budget for $863 million for special appropriations, but in the governor's proposed budget would be $70 million. I'm just trying to work out where that cut would come from.
Yeah, that's oil and tax credit bonds is what that is for the special appropriation. So that answers that question, yeah.
Okay, let's take another question online, please.
Our next question is from Elwood Bremer. Please go ahead.
Hi, I'm just curious, given the stark difference between this year's budget and last year's, would the administration be happy with a budget that looked largely similar to this proposal, given spending $1.5 billion in savings, or are you hoping there are changes to it?
Yeah, that's an interesting question, Elwood. I'm really not quite sure there's an answer for that question. It's, as we said in the beginning, this is a proposed budget by the administration that's been assembled from the foundation up, taking into consideration the Alaskans' input, all the input from the departments, and this is the beginning of the process, and the legislature essentially will have their opportunity from the 16th on to digest it and to make modified proposals as well. So the answer to that is we'll have to wait and see how this debate evolves.
Okay, take another question online, please.
We have a follow-up question from Becky Borer. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Becky Borer, the Associated Press. For Brian or for Mr. Stevens, is there, given the amount of money that would come out of the CBR, is the amount that would be left over a comfortable, I guess, shock absorber? And were details also released today for any supplemental spending for 20 that would include any of the Medicaid projections that might have fallen short?
So thank you for that question. I think you have two questions. One regarding the CBR. Again, going back to the statement that this is a proposed budget that goes forth to the legislature, and the legislatures are the appropriation body, and so we're going to be in discussion with them, and we don't know what that final number is going to be with the CBR. There's lots of variables that need to be addressed before the final budget gets signature from the governor. Your second question about the supplemental, could you repeat that?
Were details released on the supplemental today as part of the documents? I'm wondering in particular what we might be looking at for supplemental when it comes to Medicaid spending.
So the supplemental numbers are what OMB projects as the likely supplemental number. We wanted to build that into the projection, and for the general public and for the legislature to get an understanding of what we think will be the likely number for that supplemental request. And so the answer to that is there will be detail on the OMB webpage that you can find for that, yes.
Okay, we got time for one more question online, please.
And we have a follow-up from Nat Hurst. Please go ahead.
Yeah, I'm going to kind of try to put two questions together here, maybe at my own peril. But I mean, I'm struck by the fact. I mean, drawing $1.5 billion from reserves when there's about $2 billion in those reserves. I mean, how is that not a problem? A and B, is the Dunleavy administration still ruling out taxes as one way to help fill some of that deficit?
Not no peril today. I'd be happy to try to do my best to answer both of those questions. The first is the $1.5 billion draw that is shown as a fund source in this budget, as Chief of Staff Stevens said, is a beginning point, right? And you don't cash that check on the day that we do this budget release. There's a robust conversation that needs to be had with the legislature and all Alaskans, again, about what we want to be as a state, what we want to provide, and how we want to pay for it. I think the governor is open to all conversations with the legislature, and the public, and we're looking forward to having them.
Okay, let's go ahead and wrap it up here with a final question in the room. James, you have a question?
On the tax.
Yeah, that's what I was going to follow up on anyway.
Oh, I'm sorry. No peril, I just forgot part two. So again, the discussion I think really needs to be on that big process, and the governor trusts Alaskans and trusts the legislature to have this discussion, to have this input. We've not identified a single source. We've not identified a single answer. It's the governor's job to help lead us through this discussion and make sure all Alaskans are represented. Matt, that means revenues and expenditures at some point have to come in line in a sustainable manner, and I think everything's on the table in that discussion.
And Jeff, this is just a general question for you. I mean, Brett Huber had just said it's the governor's job to lead us through this discussion. I mean, what meeting did the governor have to go to? What meeting is more important than the budget?
He had another obligation, I'm sorry. But if you have any follow-up questions, we'll be happy to take it. So anyway, I think we are out of time. I appreciate you all coming. If you have any follow-up questions, please send me an email. I'll get you an answer as quickly as possible. I know you guys are on deadline, and thanks for coming.